The first thing responders noticed was the silence. Not the kind you expect inside a church on a weekday afternoon, but a heavier silence, one that seemed to press down on the walls, the pews, even the air itself. The building was unlocked. The lights were on. Nothing appeared disturbed. Except for the body. She was found face down in the baptismal pool at the front of the church. Her hair floated gently around her head, dark strands spreading across the surface of the water like ink. Her dress clung to her back, heavy with moisture. One shoe was missing. At first glance, it looked like a tragic accident. At second glance, nothing about it did. The pool was shallow, less than 4 feet deep. Designed for ceremony, not danger. The water was clean, still, undisturbed, no signs of a struggle, no splashing, no overturned furniture nearby. And yet, she was dead. Her name was Elena Moore. 17 years old. A choir member. A volunteer. Known to arrive early and leave late. Known to sit alone in the second pew on the left during evening services. The man who found her was the church caretaker. He had come in to prepare the sanctuary for a midweek service. When he saw her, he assumed she was praying. Then he realized she wasn't moving. Emergency services arrived within minutes. They documented the scene before touching anything. Photographs were taken from every angle. Water samples were collected. The temperature of the room was logged. The position of her arms. The angle of her neck. The placement of her feet. Everything was recorded. Because in forensic work, stillness speaks. Elena's face was partially submerged. Her lips were pale. There were no visible wounds. No blood. No torn clothing. Her hands were open, fingers relaxed, nails clean. Too clean. Investigators noted that her palms showed no signs of abrasion. No scrapes. No defensive marks. Her knees were intact. No bruising consistent with a fall. If she had slipped, there would be evidence. There wasn't. The coroner arrived and made an initial observation. Drowning appeared possible, but unlikely. Not impossible, just unlikely. The human body resists drowning. Instinct takes over. Muscles tense. Limbs thrash. Water is displaced. The baptismal pool showed none of that. The waterline was even. The surface calm. There were no ripples frozen in time by responders' arrival. Someone had placed her there. Or she had entered the water already unconscious. That distinction mattered. Elena's phone was found neatly placed on a nearby wooden bench. Screen facing down. Powered off. No water damage. No fingerprints beyond her own, and one partial smudge too faint to classify. Her bag sat beside it. Wallet inside. Cash untouched. ID present. This was not a robbery. The timeline began forming almost immediately. Security cameras from the church parking lot showed Elena arriving at 4:12 p.m. She exited her car alone. She paused before entering, adjusted her hair, and checked her phone. She never left. No one else was recorded entering the church after her. No one was recorded leaving. Which raised a question investigators would return to again and again. How does a girl end up dead in a locked church with no sign of another person? Inside the sanctuary, the baptismal pool was drained later that evening. At the bottom, investigators found something they hadn't expected. A single strand of synthetic fiber. Pale blue. Caught in the drainage grate. It didn't match Elena's clothing. It didn't match anything inside the church. It was carefully bagged and labeled. Outside, detectives began speaking to people who knew her. They learned Elena had been quiet in the days leading up to her death. Not withdrawn, just focused. She had asked questions about baptism schedules. Asked whether the church was open in the afternoons. Asked whether the caretaker would be present. She had told her mother she was staying late to practice hymns. Her mother believed her. Everyone did. By nightfall, the church doors were locked. The lights were turned off. Yellow tape sealed the entrance. But the questions had only begun. because churches are meant for confession. And the evidence inside this one was just starting to speak. The next morning, the church was quiet again, but investigators were already moving. Forensic specialists returned to the scene, carefully reviewing every photograph, every note, every fiber collected the night before. The synthetic blue fiber found in the drainage grate had been tested overnight. It was a type commonly used in a specific brand of gloves sold at local hardware stores. Not unusual in itself, but it didn't match anything in the church or Elena's wardrobe. Someone had been careful enough to leave it behind, and careless enough to leave a trace. Meanwhile, Elena's phone was examined in detail. The device had no water damage and no fingerprints besides her own. But the screen showed one critical clue, her last message. "I'm going to see him. Alone. Don't worry." The timestamp, for 15 p.m. Her mother had assumed she was practicing hymns. Her friends had assumed she was at choir rehearsal. But the message wasn't to a friend, it wasn't to a family member. It was to someone Elena had met online, someone she trusted. Detectives traced the account. The IP address led to a small apartment across town. The man who lived there had an alibi for the day of Elena's death, supposedly working from home. But forensic examination of security footage, cross-referenced with Elena's phone GPS, told a different story. She had arrived at the church alone at 4:12 p.m., yes, but someone had followed. Cameras missed them. The angle of the main entrance was limited. Yet timestamps showed a car parked across the street, engine running, for 20 minutes. A car registered to the man she had messaged. The caretaker had noticed nothing. No one had entered the church officially after Elena arrived. Yet the body's position, the lack of struggle, and the untouched surroundings suggested the killer had known the building intimately, how to enter and leave without a trace. Inside the lab, forensic scientists found more clues. Water analysis revealed traces of a mild sedative in the baptismal pool, the kind a doctor might prescribe, but not one Elena had access to. Toxicology confirmed it. She had been sedated before entering the pool. The fiber, the sedative, the GPS data, and the phone message all painted a quiet but damning picture. Elena hadn't slipped. She hadn't wandered in on her own. She had been lured. Detectives interviewed her friends and family again. Patterns emerged, small lies, inconsistent statements. One friend claimed Elena had left for choir practice at 4:05 p.m., but phone logs showed she had left home at 4 p.m. A minor discrepancy, but in investigation, timing is everything. By midweek, the suspect's alibi began to unravel. He admitted to sending messages, meeting her at the church, and panicking when things went wrong. The sedation was meant to calm her, he said, to prevent her from calling for help, not to harm her. Yet his story contradicted forensic evidence. The water showed careful placement of her body, almost ceremonious, as if the killer was enacting a plan he had imagined, step by step. Detectives reconstructed the timeline. For 00 p.m. Elena leaves home. For 12 p.m. Elena enters church. For 13, for 14 p.m. suspect enters quietly through side door. For 15 p.m. last message sent. For 17 p.m. suspect sedates Elena. For 20 p.m. body placed in baptismal pool, carefully positioned. For 25 p.m. suspect exits, leaving fiber behind. For 30 p.m. church appears empty, caretaker enters later. No one would have noticed. Not even the caretaker. Not even the cameras. The arrest was quiet. No chase. No struggle. The suspect's confession confirmed what the evidence had already revealed. Elena's mother cried, not only for the loss of her daughter, but for the knowledge that the truth had always been waiting in plain sight, in a fiber, a message, a timestamp, and the stillness of the water. Detectives sealed the case file. Every document, every photograph, every sample had been logged. The forensic team's work was done, and the legal system would take over. But for those who followed the investigation, one lesson remained clear. Silence doesn't mean nothing happened. Stillness doesn't mean innocence. And sometimes, the smallest clue speaks louder than the loudest witness. The church returned to quiet. The baptismal pool was drained and cleaned, as if nothing had ever occurred. But the memory lingered. And as always, the evidence spoke. If you want to follow cases where the truth hides in the smallest detail, subscribe to Silent Evidence. The evidence never lies.